Good afternoon from the Sussex Downs here in the UK, where it's the opposite of a bunker this week. Sun is shining and I've actually been outside testing the limits of spacing, making sure I don't get too near the gate. So it's a weird time, as we all know. We've had some interesting guests. We've gone in weird directions over the past couple of editions of Blockspeak. That's blockspeak.io for the full Monty, so to speak. I'm Monty Mumford. I'm the host. Today we have a guy who's sheltering in North Carolina, I believe. Mark Yusko, great following on Twitter. Founder, oh my God, I've forgotten what the name of his company is. I'm going to tell it. Is the founder, the CEO, and the chief investment officer of Morgan Creek Capital. Unlike many guests, I've never met Mark before. We've had a 1-minute chat, so we could go anywhere. Mark, tell our audience about you. Just tell us your story, and then we'll go from there.
Well, Monty, again, thanks for having me on the show, and I look forward to the conversation. As our pre-conversation alluded to, we're gonna have some fun disagreeing on some things, I'm sure.
Excellent.
The story is interesting. I always say my life's just a series of happy accidents. I grew up on the left coast out in Seattle. My family moved around a lot when I was in high school, went to 3 different high schools. I hated my parents at the time, but I have forgiven them since. But it taught me one thing, actually. Going from Seattle, Washington to Weston, Connecticut to Houston, Texas, kind of taught me how to be adaptable and how to fit in and how to be social and interact with people, which has proved to be a good thing in a career. So went to school to be an architect, didn't like that. Finished up pre-med, didn't want to be a doctor, went to business school, and I went to work for an insurance company, like about 40% of people do. They end up working for insurance companies.
That's my first job.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere, right? And so, but the guy who was doing investments retired, and so I took over that portfolio and was managing bonds back in the late 80s. And that was a good thing to do since I missed the crash of equities in 87.
Yeah.
But I had an itch to look at equities. So I left the insurance company, went to work for an asset manager, running equities. And then I got the call. And that's kind of what changed my life. And there's a famous football coach over here, our football, American football, not your football, soccer, but which I grew up playing for lots of years.
Good man.
But the interesting thing was there's a famous coach, Lou Holtz, who had a lifetime contract at University of Minnesota unless Notre Dame called. And I'm a Notre Dame guy, so Notre Dame called. I went back to the alma mater and I got into endowment investing. And
Right.
Endowment investing is different in the sense that I thought I was going to miss picking stocks and bonds, right? But what I realized when I got to the endowment is investing is really not so much about picking stocks and bonds. It's about picking asset classes. It's about picking managers. Yeah. It's about picking strategies. And it's about having a discipline or a philosophy like value or growth or momentum. Mm-hmm. And so spent a lot of time kind of inculcating this endowment model of investing into how I saw the world. And I realized that all the big decisions, right? Do I go stocks or bonds? Do I go US or international? Do I go emerging markets or developed markets? Do I go venture capital or real estate? Those were where the big money was made.
Yeah.
And throughout my career, I kind of stumbled across a number of opportunities in times just like we're probably going to talk about today, during crises where everything looks dark, but that's where you can sow the seeds of incredible investment opportunities if you are aware of the danger, but you see the opportunity that's created by the dislocations.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, I think I don't know if it was Jack Nicklaus or Gary Player.
Yeah.
He said the more I practice, the luckier I get.
So, amen to that. Yeah.
So when you say that your life is lucky mishaps, I think you're underplaying yourself. My mate calls it pro-incidences.
I love that. Pro-incidences, not coincidences.
Happens at the right time. And he runs a metaphor company. It's a very interesting company that uses not companies' messaging, but their use of metaphor. So he works with Adidas and Nike about the way they use it in competition or battle. It's very interesting. I'll send you a link.
Oh, I'd love to know about that, because most of my life I've spoken in metaphor and storytelling, and it's an amazing communication tool.
Absolutely.
everyone can relate to stories, because our life is just a series of stories, and metaphor is so underutilized. So that's fascinating.
Oh, but that we could talk about that all day long. But we're doing another podcast called Smart Speak, mate. Oh, that's a good idea. Now you're talking. That is a good idea.
Talking. I like it.
Well, maybe Blockspeak will turn out to be that anyway, or maybe you're changing it yourself. I also like the way that you use left coast, not west coast. I've never heard that before. Is there any metaphor or underlying reason?
It's really just literally left and right. If you're staring at a map, you're either on the left side or the right side. I mean, there probably are some political leanings in there too, but New York's just as left as LA. But
absolutely.
I just think about it, physical proximity. I mean, I really, I think about proximity a lot. I think about geography a lot. I mean, I always say if I could have your accent, I'd gain 40 IQ points. It'd be awesome. Just living in that part of the world, you just sound so intelligent. And
that's very kind of you. We always think the same about Americans, actually. You've got, well, it depends on the accent. I mean, some accents.
Well, it does. Look, I live in the South, and this will offend many of the people I live with, but the Southern accent is tough because people assume that you're less intelligent. And if you get into the deep South where they talk slowly, then people think, now there is an advantage to that though. It can be, crazy like a fox or sly like a fox, that you can lull people into a false sense of security and then take advantage. But look, I think dialects are interesting, geographies are interesting. And if you think about what we're in, right? We're in this COVID crisis, and we've locked down global economy, and what we've done is we've reversed the effects of what I think one of the most powerful forces in the history of mankind, which is globalization. Yeah. Right. We took Adam Smith, comparative advantage, we put it on steroids, and we created the greatest economic outcome for the highest number of people in the history of mankind. We raised billions with a B, of people out of abject poverty. We put them on a class or on a path to middle classhood. And now we're reversing that. And, I tweeted about this the other day, and I got some crap from some people that said I was reading too much into it. But to me, if you think this whole thing is about the virus, you're not paying attention.
No, agreed. It's funny. There was, I don't know if you ever listened to the BBC or the World Service. I don't know what the license means in the US, but there was a fascinating show on about last week, and it was not a spat. It was a conversation. The letters between the conversations between Adam Smith and Beethoven. Do you know what I mean?
Oh my gosh!
And how they were different humanists, and one was an economist. You know what I mean? But I think those are the things that many of us are doing at the moment, right? Do you know what I mean? I mean, I'm not by nature a capitalist. Do you know what I mean? I've always thought I'm a bit of an anarchist, to be honest. Do you know what I mean? And I've always thought capitalism was historically bankrupt. So there's a bit of a Marxist in me. There's a bit of a hypocrite in me. There is definitely a Shapley socialist in me, and a Bollinger Bolshevik in me. Absolutely, I like the good life. But it's how people are spending their time at the moment. I mean, I'm interested. I mean, a lot of people are spending their time looking what's behind the person they're speaking to. So I note the nice layout. I like the way you live. It's an interesting setup. So what have you been doing? Have you been looking for opportunities here, or have you been learning the piano, or what have you been doing?
Look, I love your point about how people spend their time, and you can infer a lot about people and how they allocate their time and where their priorities are. And I'm with you. Look, I probably am more capitalist than anarchist. On the other hand, I do think right now is a time that anarchy probably should rise, because I think capitalism has been replaced by cronyism at the top.
Agreed.
Some of the recent deals that we've announced here in the U.S. are perfect examples of that. Yep. The more money you contribute to the political parties, the more you get in this series of handouts. That's why I say, if you think it's about the virus, you're not paying attention. This is about crony capitalism. It's about MMT. It's about widening the gap in wealth and income inequality, not shrinking it.
Yep.
And so I've actually been spending time. Interesting, you asked that question, which I love the question. It's just great. I've been spending my time digging into Taoist philosophy.
Oh, really?
As I've always had an interest in it. In fact, the greatest book I think I've ever read on investing is called The Dow Jones Averages, TAO.
This is quite good. Can you see that?
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic.
Have you ever read that?
No, I'm on it.
In Search of the Miraculous, the classic exploration of Eastern religion, teaching, and philosophy. It's my next book, and then the one after that is Euclid's. And this is
wow.
This has been on my desk for 5 years, man, and I can't understand anything. But I am going to do this by the end of May. I know
that is impressive. No, I started slow.
That's the final one. That's the one that's easier to read.
Those are awesome.
I've interrupted you.
That is no. I was just gonna say what's interesting is I got the first introduction was this book called The Dow Jones Averages, and Dow is TAO, and it was written by this guy Bennett Goodspeed, who had this very cool company that he created years and years ago, where he basically read all the trade journals and he synthesized data and then sold those inferences to companies, inferential focus. Okay. Yeah. And he was a genius, but he talked about this idea of being a whole-brained person. Mm-hmm. And what that meant was that, most of us guys in particular, we tend to be more left-brained, analytical, right-handed, less creative, more focused on data. And then there's the other side, and it tends to be more females, but not necessarily, are a little more right-brained, a little more creative, a little more intuitive. And he says to be really great at something, you have to be whole-brained. And so he brought in all these ideas of Taoist philosophy around this idea of being whole-brained. So I read this book, kind of changed my way of thinking about investing. And over the years, kind of dabbled in doing a little more reading, like the book you just showed. But I never did anything about it.
Does that mean so the Dow of the Dow of Wall Street, right? So that changed your life, or made you think about things in a different way, or did it just make you feel better as a capitalist?
No, it really did change. It really did change my life in the way I thought about investing. In fact, up to that point, I really did think that investing was just, hey, if I have a better spreadsheet and I have better data, then I'm going to win. So
you became more whole-brained.
Yes.
You took the other part of your brain.
I'm still not great. Like meditation. I try, and I just, I stink at it, but I'm trying. And a couple of things about the whole-brained approach is, if you think about guys, right? And again, and it's oversimplifying, but it really is guys, because guys make up 90% of the investment landscape. Why is that? Well, it's just because it's a patriarchal society and it's still, changing, but it is what it is. But why do guys then underperform women as investors? And there's been many studies that have shown this, and it's for three reasons. One, we're overconfident, right? We overtrade, and we trade in areas that we don't really understand.
Yeah.
Whereas women, on the other hand, tend not to be overconfident. They tend to stay in their lane. They tend to only invest in things they really understand and appreciate. And then they don't overtrade. They don't think they're smarter than the market. And then it's called women's intuition for a reason. And the intuitive side of your psyche is really important. And I think so many people get so caught up in the numbers, and it's like the old, cartoon of the guy looking in the rearview mirror and he drives off the cliff because the road turns. And I think what it did for me is it helped me be a little more contemplative when it comes to big picture investing. And now in this idea of crises, if I look back in my career, the best investments I ever made came out of crises, and they came from trusting. It's an important word, especially in terms of a blockchain and crypto, trusting people's intuition about where things were going to go, not how they were now, but where they were going to go in the future. Okay,
so that's interesting. So you're saying, in very broad strokes, I think we both understand what you're saying, is that a woman's intuition, blah, 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 males overconfident, some would say cocky, entitled, all of that. And the situation such as this, the cocky, arrogant, overtrading male is good for this time, or do we need a kind of, inverted commas, female intuitive approach to the crisis?
Oh, look, I think
Which
absolutely we need the latter. And there was a great article on that yesterday saying that if you look around the world at the best responses to the virus, it's where they have women leaders.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm all over that, man. Do you know what I mean? It's like I've met the most amazing women in London and on the speaker circuit over the last 3 or 4 years, right? And how the male gender thinks that he's smarter than what I think. This is one thing I read about COVID is that it's hitting older men more than women.
Yes.
And that's because we've always been told that men are stronger, we've got bigger muscles, more blood, all this nonsense. But we only have one X chromosome. And if a virus comes along and you've got 2 X chromosomes, i.e. women, they have a much better chance of surviving than men. And we're seeing this right in our faces at the moment. So the weaker sex, the gentler sex, fuck that. Do you know what I mean? I'm serious. I know you lot don't like swearing that much, do you?
Oh, no. I love it. I drop the F-bomb all the time. Although one time I said, pardon my French, and I was with somebody French, and they said, why do you say that? We're not vulgar.
We're always happy to have a sparring match with a French, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
By the way, you talked about the English accent adding 40 points to your IQ. Well, my London accent, I think, added probably 40 women to my bed in the times that I spent there. It was a very good tool, I have to say. Girls do like it.
Love it.
But that was a long time ago. Now, Morgan Creek. So we're kind of agreeing that this is the time for intuition.
Yep.
You have made the most of opportunities in the past, missed 87, but obviously there's been crashes since then. What do you think you might do differently this time?
Look, again, really insightful question in the sense that, every crisis is different. And I talked about this a couple weeks ago, that the Chinese character for crisis is actually 2 brushstrokes, right? The famous JFK quote, one for danger, one for opportunity. And great investors are always aware of danger, right? They don't dismiss it. That's why I think, so many of our current leaders, most of which here in the United States, they're just buffoons, right? They scoff at danger. They don't appreciate the nuance of actual danger. And then they're so focused on their own reputation and their image image that they can't do their job effectively. And so they're missing the opportunities that I think are right there. And look, I've been saying this for a while, the cure to me is far worse than the disease, right? The virus itself, okay, it's a bad virus, but it's really not that much more virulent than a number of other viruses.
But why has the right? That's just the one thing that does my head in, right? I remember Gordon Brown. I think at our time was our God, I've forgotten it, Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yeah.
So Gordon Brown, very sober, stayed.
Yes. Was
leader for a while, but not too boring to be a leader. But a good mind and a great economist. I mean, he did a lot of stuff globally about helping with the financial crisis in 2007, 2010, whatever, right? And I listened to him recently, a voice of reason. And in that time, in that decade, we now have arrogant buffoons from the Philippines to the US to the UK.
Yes.
Don't mark my words. Boris survived, ho ho ho, but his policies have been just as foolhardy as Trump. You've got the guy Monzero. I can't remember. I hate him so much. Bonzero, the guy in Brazil. So you've got no kind of global approach to this. And I think it's going to be really different this time. I'm just surprised that these right-wing populist leaders, globally, we seem to have chosen the old over the young, which would go against pretty much. I mean, I don't know how much money Trump has lost, right? He can't wait for America to go back to work.
Yeah, look,
he's lost a lot. Why do you think it's almost kind of contrarian, or counterintuitive almost?
It is. It's. I call it the dictator playbook. And if you look around the world, we have had a rise in dictators or dictator light. They may not be full-on dictators, but dictator light. And why is that? Well, it goes to this essential essentially as you said, the rise of populism, the rise of nationalism, and this idea of, again, patriarchy and benevolence coming from the government. So what does a dictator do to get in power, right? They promise freebies or handouts to the masses. The masses tend to be younger. So, you look around, you look at the United States, we have this echo boom, right? The kids of the baby boomers, and it's bigger than the baby boom. So all of those, that generation, they're seduced by this idea of socialism. That's why Bernie Sanders had the big following. And they're seduced by this idea of, hey, I can get something from this patriarchal society. So if I support these older, kind of father figures, then I'll get my handouts, and maybe I can have more of a life of leisure. And then you throw on top of it the whole social media problem, which is all of the fake life, right? These influencers who are paid to go around the world and snap selfies of the life that they're living that isn't real. And they're probably not very happy because they're by themselves taking selfies instead of with a big group. But people think, oh, well, wouldn't that be great if I could do that? If I could travel the world and get paid by some brand to drink their vodka or, wear their clothes. And so we got all this confluence of events that has led to where we are. And if you look around the world, you say, well, how could that person possibly get elected? How could...
No, listen, dude, I agree with all that, totally. I understand that kind of timeline and the philosophy behind the politics. But I'm just, the question I was trying to ask, and maybe I misphrased it, was this situation that you just described we have. Why has there almost been a global decision, globally, every country just about, to lock down their societies to protect the old, when if they are right-wing populists, the decision surely would have been to keep things open because they didn't want to lose any money. And it's whether they want to create a wider divide now by this happening, or that it's much worse than we're told, and it's going to last a lot longer than we're told.
No, just the opposite.
They had to lock down because of just the opposite. Look, again, I feel really strongly about this, and some people, he's going down. I'm no conspiracy theorist. I'm an intellectual man. I'm not.
To me, this is not about, conspiracy theory was created by the CIA post JFK, right? Yeah. They created the term to deflect, people looking at facts and saying, well, wait a minute, this doesn't add up. This doesn't make sense. This person couldn't. Yeah. So I'm not about conspiracy theories. I'm just about reality checks. So let's think about this particular virus versus other viruses, right? If we think about influenza infects tens of millions of people globally annually, and we have a fatality of about 200,000-ish, 250,000 globally. Never had any sort of discussion of lockdowns or change of behavior. Tuberculosis, not exactly the same as a virus, but a bacterial infection, kills 1.2 million people every year. 1.2 million. Swine flu, 61 million infections. We're at 2 million of COVID. Never one discussion of, canceling school, locking down businesses. Why did this happen? Well, look, if you look at just the facts, you'd say, well, it doesn't make any sense. But if you think about incentives, to your point, why are the old doing things to protect themselves that seem on the surface to be counterintuitive? Well, it's like entitlements. What is an entitlement? An entitlement is something you promise to yourself that you don't pay for, and you ask your kids and grandkids to fund, right? So who wouldn't vote for entitlements? So that's why we have massive entitlement problems in the United States and other developed democracies, because the older generation is in charge, the boomers, right? The boomer generation is the biggest generation until we get down to Gen X and Gen Y. And so
until we get to the current generation, which are called the coronials.
The coronials, there you go.
You heard it first. My son, who's 17, is always like, okay, boomer, ha, ha, ha. He calls COVID boomer remover.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I said, you cynical little bastards, you know what I mean?
That is crazy stuff. And,
it's quite
and
funny.
Look, Here's the thing, right? Every year, a certain number of people of a certain age are going to pass away, right? That's just the cycle of life. And I thought there was a great point made the other day that all-cause mortality is probably not going to be any different this year than other years,
Right.
but it will just be changed, right? There won't be as many that die from influenza or pneumonia. They'll just, die from COVID. Now, the real problem we have is we're coding people that pass from something. We don't know what it is. And they're saying, oh, it must be COVID. Well, maybe, maybe not. Passing with COVID is different than passing from COVID.
Yeah.
But to your point about boomer remover, I think what's interesting is viruses in general, okay, they attack the vulnerable populations, either the very old or the very young. The interesting thing about this one is like TB, it doesn't really affect the young, it affects the old. And that, could just be any number of things. Novel coronaviruses have existed in the past, SARS and MERS. Although I do find it interesting that here is one that probably does border on conspiracy. Why does a novel coronavirus always show up in the year where the US is talking about invading the Middle East? Iraq in 2003, Iraq in 2012, and then Iran in 2019. So it's just an interesting question.
Yes, please, after you.
No. But to your original question, why did we lock everything down?
Yeah.
My theory, I guess just my theory, is that if you are trying to consolidate power, the best way to consolidate power is to widen the gap between the rich and poor and make the poor completely dependent on you as the government.
Yep.
And if your plan is to subvert limitations on duration of your reign, shall we say, if your belief is that you can subvert the normal operating laws, you would create a solution that is far more detrimental than the problem you were facing.
Yeah.
And again, social media impacts that. And look, there were these crazy, irrational, I will say bordering on criminal studies that were released saying that millions of people were going to die if we didn't lock down the world. That's just false. We know it's false now, but at the time, people believed it. And I think we overreacted, but I'm more cynical than that. I think it's all part of a longer term plan to consolidate wealth and power in the hands of a small number. I call it 1 percentilism.
No, absolutely. But the one thing that I've always been a free guy. You know what I mean? Freedom is my shit. Whether it's freedom, I've traveled the world for 15 years and you know what I mean? I've motorbikes, whatever. It's my thing. Yep. And I've always been a bit wary of technology. I joined the human race when I was 35, 20 years ago after being on the road, you know what I mean? And technology was dead computers. I was happy about dead computers, but I ended up writing for blooming Forbes and Wired and MIT Tech Review about technology. It's the most ironic of ironies, to be fair. But the one thing that I was always really wary about, and having a kid who's now 17, was to know what was going to happen to him, right? And the one thing that I was really, really, really focused on, sorry, that's a very bad word, but was privacy.
Yeah.
And my privacy, I don't want a device following me around. We go back to Big Brother all the time. I mean, the prescience of that novel was just outrageous. But I've always, we've got GDPR here and all that stuff, but I've always, I don't click on ads and I don't, I'm not an idiot. I'm not, if you don't want to be surveilled, then don't be surveilled. But we've been given the choice very clearly in the last month. What do you prefer, your health or your privacy? Oh, fuck my privacy. Give me my health. And this is where you have a sweet spot of the buffoons, the buffoonery that you correctly allude to, with technology, with power, with disease. It's a terrible time, right? I think there's going to be none of this like 200 people are gathering in Trafalgar Square to protest against the new surveillance law that was brought in. Disperse immediately. You're creating a public health hazard.
Yes.
And I agree with you totally, because I think we've given it all up. in the last month, we have given ourselves up to these people, these males. You know what I mean? And I think that maybe it's just luck. It was luck. Wasn't any conspiracy about it. It was a virus that crops up sometimes at wet markets. It was stronger or weirder than ever before. And then suddenly it's taken a life of its own. And then the top 0.1% of the 1% of the 1% who really run the world, like the popes and the people like that, have gone, hang on a minute. If we shit the life out of them, they'll be disorientated. Naomi Klein, blah, blah, blah. And we've disorientated them before with money and losing all their money. Now we disorientate them even more with losing all their money and their health and their life and their friends' life and their family's life and the intergenerational life. This is the opportunity of a lifetime.
Yes.
To take over the world.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely is. And look, it's interesting. There was a paper written in 2017 that said that because of the grand solar minimum that's occurring this year, that we would have a virus outbreak, a pandemic.
Sorry, what's that grand solar minimum? I've never heard that phrase.
Grand solar minimum. So the sun cycles over 11-year cycles between lots of sunspot activity and no sunspot activity. And it basically just has to do with the nuclear reaction that is the great ball of fire that is the sun. And when there's a lot of solar activity, we get global warming and we get less viruses. We get, certain other things that happen when the temperature is warmer. But when you get a grand solar minimum, which means the lowest level of solar activity, you actually get global cooling.
Right.
And the last pure grand solar minimum was in 1865 when we had the plague. And so I'm not saying that this is the plague, but what they said was because of lower solar activity, you get less disinfectant activity of solar radiation, and therefore there was likely to be a pandemic. And they actually wrote in the paper that it would probably originate in China because of sanitary conditions and all these other reasons. They didn't predict that it would be COVID, but they actually said, look, it's going to happen in 2019, 2020. It's going to originate in China. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And here we are in the grand solar minimum, and we're talking about this wave of a virus. Now, I actually go against the use of the word pandemic because it's actually not worse than influenza, and just in terms of numbers of infections. So how do you call this a pandemic if influenza is not a pandemic? It's not as bad as TB. So how do you not call that a pandemic? But we're there, right? And to your point, I think what they did is never waste a good crisis if you're in power. So take this crisis and look, that's why I say, if you think this is just about the virus, if you don't think it's about surveillance, if you don't think it's about control of mobility, and if you don't think it's about social access and restrictions, right? Think about this. If we go down the path to now we're all going to have to be tested and we're only going to be allowed access to certain things if we test a certain way, well, what if the test is wrong, right? What if the vaccine doesn't work? There's so many things wrong with that. And if we're tested for COVID, well, do we have to be tested for influenza? Do we have to be tested for swine flu or SARS or MERS? We think they're dead. We haven't had a case of SARS since 2004, but we don't know.
Or you have to kind of blow into your mobile before you leave your door. Right. You hope to do that when you go into a sports stadium. Soccer actually is an English word. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Soccer comes from association football, who set up football.
I love learning something new. Especially, I said, I grew up for 20 plus years playing soccer, so that's fantastic.
Yeah, so soccer is probably the right term in a weird way. I'm missing my team, Brentford. I am. No, but that's the thing that worries me, is that there are going to be different ways of dealing with it, right? You measure your temperature when you go into a restaurant, a newly designed restaurant where there are booths where you can't get anywhere near them. I'm a member of a private members club in Soho. We've had social distancing for many years, and I quite like it like that. I don't have to queue at the bar. Listen, this could go on forever, and I really hope to meet you face to face.
No, we'll do it. We'll do it
in the future. You know what I mean? I'll come and see you. I'd actually come and see you. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
That'd be great.
Tell us a little bit more about you, where people can get in touch with you, what Morgan is doing. And then maybe you can give us a few optimistic words at the end before I.
Yeah. So Morgan Creek, we're based in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We got a small office in Shanghai, small office in New York, but we travel around the world talking to smart people, allocating capital to mostly non-traditional managers, private equity managers, venture capitalists, hedge funds, and the like on behalf of clients. We run some internal funds. We actually run a reasonably large fund in blockchain technology, which is an area that we absolutely love.
Okay.
And I think it is the world changer. I think the biggest wealth creation opportunity I'll see probably in my lifetime, and I actually plan to live a long time, is this transition to the trust net, as I call it, in 2024, where the Internet of Everything is linked through blockchains. Mm-hmm. And I'm easy to find, right? I'm at Morgan Creek cap.com is our website. I'm at Mark Yusko on Twitter. I'm on Twitter a lot. In fact, my wife would say way too much, or my daughter would say way too much. But I love Twitter because
that's MARK.
Yes, YUSKO.
Right.
Yep,
okay.
YUSKO.
No underscore, nothing.
And we're talking today because of Twitter, which I love. And I love having relationships that I've built around the world. My favorite was I happened to be in Greece on vacation when they did the lockdown of the banks. And someone saw that I posted a picture and said, "Hey, are you in Athens?" I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "Hey, do you want to meet the president of the biggest bank?" I'm like, "Yes."
Excellent.
And I got to spend 2 hours with the president of the bank. And it was me, him, his secretary, and 2 armed guards because there was no one else in the thing. And after 2 hours, I finally said, I got to go. He would have talked to me forever because he had nothing else to do. And I got more insight from that meeting than I could have ever gotten from reading reports from other people.
There's your coincidence.
I do. Yeah, there is no coincidence. Exactly. But I love the fact that, one, Global Village really does exist, and blockchain and social media like Twitter help shrink the borders or basically eliminate the borders. And I think we're moving to this digital world. Now, the downside of the digital world, some of the things we were talking about before, where surveillance will be higher, privacy, as you say, which sounds much better than privacy. Privacy goes away. And it does cause us to have to think about what are we willing to give up in exchange for something else. So as we think about our job, right? Our job is to allocate capital on behalf of investors to places where we think we can make the highest return. For me, innovation is always number one. I'm always looking for new technologies, new ideas. And so I think 2 areas of focus right now are, technology around blockchain technology and digitization. The second is life sciences, right? Healthcare is going to continue to boom, particularly in some of these emerging markets where we've seen kind of the ugly underbelly of lack of sophistication in healthcare systems. So those are areas of interest. In the public markets, I still think that the developed public markets are wildly overvalued. I think what's going on in the U.S. is kind of crazy. People thinking that we're going to have a V-shaped recovery.
No way.
After what is likely to be, the greatest downturn in economic activity and highest rise in unemployment in history, worse than the Great Depression. So the idea that stocks should be rising here doesn't make sense to me. But look, part of the challenge is in the world in which I live, which is the investing world, things have changed dramatically, right? It used to be dominated by human beings, and human beings have judgment. They have the ability to analyze and synthesize, but most importantly, they know what to ignore. And machines, unfortunately, don't have judgment. They're really fast, and so they can out-trade all of us, right? They can trade in milliseconds and microseconds, and they can make models faster, and they can make changes to the model faster, and they can do Monte Carlo simulations better. But they don't have judgment.
I think it's something worse. I don't think they have discretion.
Oh, absolutely. No discretion.
Even more important.
My 8th grade computer instructor, and I'm old enough that in 8th grade computers were not very much of a thing. And he said, a computer is as smart as a screwdriver. And it stuck with me, for 49 years, that it really matters that what goes in comes from a human being, and the human being is the one that has to have judgment. Now, true story. So I'm probably the only person on the planet that hadn't seen The Matrix up until this weekend. So 20 years after the movie, I sat down and watched all 3 movies back to back to back. It was kind of funny watching the third one where Neo is laid out like on the cross on Easter Sunday. That was kind of bizarre. But a lot of allegory there and metaphor, to your point.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
What's interesting is one of the points of The Matrix, right, is that AI kind of wrought evil on the world and the machines took over. Now, I don't think we're there, but what I do think is happening is artificial intelligence, or the presumption of intelligence, particularly by that 0.1% that you talked about, is wrecking some havoc on global economic activity and, the wealth divide. And look, at the end of the day, let's take Venezuela. How is it possible that a despot gets elected by the masses, right? Impoverishes a country and destroys what was one of the wealthiest countries in the world. How is that even possible? Well, someone say, oh, well, he didn't actually get elected. He cheated. Well, okay, fine. That's one explanation. But what if actually he did get elected? How did he do that? Well, he promised to pay the poor money. Well, what's the latest thing just came out this morning? There's a proposal in the U.S. Congress to pay people $2,000 a month.
Universal basic income.
Yeah.
Well, what I think's happened, right, is that I've been kind of planning for something like this to happen globally, globalization, but I didn't really think it'd be a pandemic. I thought it would be AI. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I thought that I've been having a lot of human experiences. I make my money digitally. I was lucky enough to come back from all that traveling as the internet started. So I fingers crossed I will probably be okay during this terrible depression, the worst economic depression in history, whether it's a V or a W or a exclamation mark. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's just so great, because I've been calling it an I instead of not a V, not a U, maybe an L, but I've been calling it an I. Exclamation point is better.
We're going to get on. Now, listen, we've gone way over time. You're a nice man. I enjoyed
this conversation a lot, Monty. I look forward to doing it again.
Slightly worried, and we will do it at the end of the year. I'd love to have you on again. I'm slightly worried that the comparison with Venezuela is that you could change the wording, what you just said, and said in the 4th term of President Trump.
Yep.
That's what terrifies me more than anything
else.
else.
Absolutely terrifying. The only thing that made me a little less terrified, Monty, is supposedly, if he tries to cancel the election, which I think is probably as part of the plan, that he can't stay on, that actually there's a process that would put the Speaker of the House in, most likely, and if not the Speaker, then it would be the head of the Senate pro tem. But here's what's crazy. Because what happens is, on January 20th, all the seats where there was not an election are vacated.
Yeah.
Both president, vice president, congressmen, and senators. So what happens
after the nomination? And then,
on January 20th. So the election's supposed to happen in November, so it doesn't happen. And on January 20th, everybody loses their seat who was up for election. But that left like 27 Democrats and 20 Republicans in the Senate and some number in Congress. And so what was going to end up happening is the Senate could then elect a new pro tem, which would be a Democrat, which would mean a Democrat would end up as temporary president until the election could actually be put on.
You leave me on a high, man.
I know, it's good stuff.
You're stuck in the surf. You don't get the waves, but you come in on the best wave of all, which is the law of the sea. You just did that. I'm not going to say anymore. Do you know what I mean? But
that's a great way to end. So I appreciate the conversation. Let's do it again. And thanks for having me on.
I feel honored to have spent time with you. Thank you very much, Mark. Have a wonderful day and stay safe.
You too. Take care.
All right. Cheers.